It was past midnight when we first stepped into the park. The iron gates, tall and rusted, loomed over us like silent sentinels. They groaned when I pushed them open, the sound carrying far into the mist as if announcing our arrival to whatever might be waiting inside. Beyond the gates, the fog curled low to the ground, snaking around the gravel path like it had been lying there all evening, waiting for the first visitor foolish enough to step through. Most people in this city knew better than to cross through here at night. The stories had been around for years: missing joggers, couples that never returned from late-night walks, the sound of children laughing where there were none, lamplight flickering as if chased by shadows. By day, it was harmless, even welcoming: children feeding pigeons, dogs barking at the edge of the pond, old men playing chess under the shade of chestnut trees. But when the sun dipped behind the skyline, the park turned into something else. Something people whispered about but never dared to confront. And yet here we were. Claire moved a step ahead of me, her coat brushing against the iron rail that lined the first stretch of path. She carried her notebook in one hand, pen clipped between her fingers, though in this light, I doubted she could see enough to write. Her other hand hovered near the flashlight strapped to her belt. I'd worked with her long enough to recognize the tension in her shoulders. She didn't like being here. Neither did I. "This place feels wrong," she murmured, her voice low enough to almost vanish into the mist. I didn't argue. Instead, I scanned the path ahead. The lamps were weak, their glow smothered by the fog. Some flickered like dying fireflies, others were dark entirely, leaving stretches of the walkway swallowed in shadow. Each step we took echoed far too loudly. The gravel crunch beneath our boots sounded like broken glass. We walked in silence for several minutes, the kind of silence that isn't empty but expectant, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then Claire froze. She lifted a hand slightly, signaling me to stop. "Quiet," she whispered. I strained my ears. At first there was nothing but the faint rustle of damp leaves in the trees. Then it came, a creak, low and drawn out, like wood shifting under weight. And beneath it, faint but clear, a sound that didn't belong, a laugh. High, sharp, quick. A child's laugh. We turned toward the sound at the same time. Nothing but trees and mist. The shadows swayed gently as though mocking us. "Local kids?" I offered, though I didn't believe it. Claire didn't answer. Her eyes had locked on something farther ahead, the playground. The swings gleamed with moisture under the pale light, chains rattling softly though the air was still. The roundabout twitched as if nudged by an invisible hand. We approached slowly. The creak of the swings grew louder with each step. I raised my flashlight, sweeping it across the playground. For a heartbeat, the beam caught something, a figure, small and hunched, sitting on the far swing. My breath hitched, but by the time I steadied the light, the swing was empty. The roundabout spun half a turn before stopping. "We're being led," Claire said finally, her voice tight. "By who?" She didn't look at me. Instead, she tilted her chin toward a narrow side path that branched away from the playground. The fog there was thicker, almost opaque. On the ground at its mouth, something pale stood out against the gravel. I knelt to pick it up. A scrap of cloth, torn roughly at the edge, still damp. My thumb brushed across a dark smear. It wasn't mud. Claire's voice was flat. "That's blood." Before I could respond, the laugh came again. Closer this time, right at the edge of hearing, like someone leaning just over our shoulders. The flashlight flickered. My grip tightened, and in that stuttering beam, I saw it, a figure standing at the far end of the path. Tall. Thin. Perfectly still. Its face hidden in the shadow of the trees. Then the beam steadied. And the figure was gone. Claire's knuckles whitened around her notebook. Her lips pressed tight, but I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't chance. This wasn't us stumbling into something. We were being watched. We were being invited. Detective Harry adjusted the collar of his coat, his breath rising in pale clouds against the heavy fog that clung to the park. The lamps along the path gave off only weak halos of light, each one more broken than the last, their flickering bulbs stretching shadows into strange, twitching shapes. The place didn't just look abandoned, it felt suspended, as if time itself had stopped moving the moment they stepped past the iron gate. Beside him, Clara walked with her flashlight angled low, her boots crunching on gravel slick with moisture. The light swept over cracked benches, worn carvings etched into the wood by hands long gone, and patches of grass where the fog seemed thicker, denser, almost alive. "This place feels wrong," Clara said finally, her voice hushed. "Like it's waiting for something." Harry's eyes swept the tree line. He had been a detective too long to ignore instincts. They weren't always right, but when they were, they saved lives. And right now, every bone in his body told him Clara was right. "Places carry memory," he muttered, tightening his grip on the flashlight. "Some more than others. But this one," he stopped mid-sentence, as though speaking the thought aloud would give weight to the unease pressing in on them. The path curved, leading them past a derelict playground. Rusted swings creaked faintly in the night air, moving though there was no wind. A roundabout sat in the middle, its metal frame glistening with dew, streaks of rust crawling down its spokes like veins. Harry slowed, his eyes narrowing. "When's the last time you saw a playground empty at night and it still felt watched?" Clara didn't answer. Instead, she crouched suddenly near the base of one of the old lampposts, her flashlight beam catching on something pale half buried in the soil. She brushed it gently with her glove, pulling it free. It was a torn piece of fabric. Heavy wool, dirt-stained, and stiff with what could only be dried blood. "Harry," she whispered, holding it up between her thumb and forefinger. Harry leaned closer, inspecting the tear. The edges were too neat, too precise to be the result of an accident or simple wear. He knew the look, it was cut, deliberately, with a sharp blade. "This isn't random," he said grimly. "Someone left this here for us to find." Clara frowned. "But why leave a clue out in the open? Wouldn't someone trying to hide a crime want the evidence gone?" "Not if the message isn't about the evidence," Harry replied, slipping the fabric into a small evidence pouch. "Not if it's about us knowing we're walking into something." The further they went, the narrower the trail became. The trees loomed taller here, their branches arching overhead like jagged ribs, blocking out the already dim light. The mist thickened, wrapping around them, dampening sound until even their own footsteps seemed muted. Then Harry froze. His hand shot out, stopping Clara mid-step. "Listen," he whispered. At first, there was nothing but the slow drip of condensation from the branches. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate, measured. Footsteps. They weren't echoes of their own, Harry knew the difference. These were heavier, slower, trailing them at a distance that felt close enough to touch, yet just far enough to remain unseen. Clara's hand tightened around her flashlight, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. "Someone's following us." Harry's eyes swept the fog. "Don't turn too fast. Whoever's back there wants us to know they're here." Clara's brow furrowed. "Why?" Harry's voice was low, steady, though his pulse hammered in his ears. "Because this isn't a chase. It's a warning." And then, another sound. A sharp, metallic clink. Slow and grating, like a chain dragged across stone. Both detectives went still. Clara angled her flashlight toward the tree-line. For a split second, her beam cut through the fog and landed on something. A figure. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Motionless. Its head tilted slightly, unnervingly, as though listening to them breathe. The silhouette's edges blurred in the mist, but there was no mistaking the stance, it wasn't random. It was waiting. Watching. The light flickered as Clara's grip faltered. By the time she steadied it, the figure was gone, swallowed whole by the fog. Harry, she whispered, barely holding back the shake in her voice. "Did you see that?" Harry's jaw tightened, his free hand brushing the inside of his coat where his revolver rested. He didn't answer right away, because admitting what they'd both seen meant acknowledging they were being hunted. Finally, his voice came low, deliberate. "We're not alone in this park, Clara. And whoever's here, they've been here longer than us." The footsteps ceased. The metallic dragging stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sounds themselves, oppressive, heavy, filled with unspoken threat. Then, from deeper within the park, came a hollow creak. The swings. Though the air was dead still, the rusted swings swayed back and forth, slow at first, then faster, as if pushed by unseen hands. The rhythmic squeal of the chains echoed unnaturally loud, cutting through the fog, filling the air like a mocking laugh. Clara swallowed hard, her eyes darting to Harry. "Do we keep going?" she asked. Harry's gaze lingered on the darkness ahead, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Turning back felt safer, but it was too late for safe. Whoever, or whatever, was here had already drawn them in. He adjusted the beam of his flashlight and stepped forward. "We go deeper. That's where the answers are." The two detectives moved on, their shadows stretching unnaturally long behind them as the fog seemed to thicken, closing in like a curtain. And somewhere, just beyond sight, the sound of footsteps began again. The pocket watch lay on the ground, its glass cracked, its hands frozen at 11:47. Harry crouched, his gloved fingers brushing away the damp leaves around it. The chain was snapped, as if torn off in a struggle. Beside him, Claire scribbled furiously in her notebook, her eyes flickering between the watch and the empty path that stretched into the dark. "It's recent," Harry muttered. "Still warm to the touch." Claire frowned. "Then whoever dropped it, they were here minutes ago." The fog thickened, swallowing the path ahead. Street lamps grew rarer deeper into the park, their glow choked by the low-hanging mist. From somewhere far off, an owl hooted, the sound oddly sharp in the silence. The air was damp with the smell of earth and moss, and Harry could feel the weight of the forest pressing in. They moved on, their flashlights slicing through the gloom. Each step crunched on gravel and twigs, echoing too loudly in the stillness. Claire's voice broke the silence. "Harry, do you hear that?" They froze. Faint, almost imperceptible, came a sound, whispers. Low, overlapping, as though several voices spoke at once, carried on the night air. Neither could catch the words, but the cadence was wrong, too measured, too deliberate. Harry raised his light toward the trees. Nothing. Just trunks and fog. The whispers stopped instantly, as though aware of being overheard. Claire gripped her notebook tighter. "We're being watched." He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. He knew she was right. The path forked, one branch leading toward the old pond at the park center, the other to a forgotten section where derelict benches lay rotting under ivy. Harry led them left, toward the pond. When they arrived, the water was still, black as oil, reflecting nothing but mist. The skeletal branches of willows hung low, their leaves brushing the surface. And there, at the edge of the pond, something caught the beam of Harry's flashlight. A shoe. It lay half submerged in the mud, as though someone had been dragged toward the water. Beside it, claw-like scrapes marked the earth, deep grooves trailing down into the pond itself. Claire swallowed hard. This isn't just a disappearance. Before Harry could respond, a ripple spread across the water. Then another. The surface stirred, though there was no wind, no stones tossed. The detectives stepped back instinctively, the air tightening around them. The whispers returned. Louder this time. Coming from the trees, from the fog, from everywhere at once. Harry swung his flashlight wildly, but the beam only cut into emptiness. His instincts screamed, whatever had left that pocket watch, whatever had been dragged into the pond, they weren't dealing with a simple missing person case. Something darker hung over this place, something stitched into the very soil of the park. Claire's voice trembled, though she tried to steady it. "Harry, do you think this is connected to the old case? The disappearances from 10 years ago?" Harry's silence was answer enough. He had thought it since they found the watch. The whispers grew more insistent, layered now with something else, the sound of chains dragging over stone, faint but unmistakable. Claire turned in a slow circle. "Harry, I don't like this." "Neither do I," he muttered. "But we're not leaving." "Not yet." He crouched near the shoe, his flashlight grazing over the mud. There, barely visible, was a trail. Small prints, uneven, leading away from the pond and deeper into the unlit section of the park. Whoever had been here was still alive, or had been. Harry straightened, his voice low but firm. "We follow." Claire looked at him in disbelief. "Into that? After what we just heard?" He gave a grim smile. "That's the job." And with that, they stepped off the path, swallowed by the fog and the whispers that refused to die down. The night deepened as the fog thickened, swallowing the old park in a damp and suffocating silence. Our flashlights cut narrow cones of light across the ground, sweeping through the tall grass and worn cobblestones. The broken statue of a forgotten general loomed nearby, its features eroded into something more like a skull than a face. It felt as though the park itself had been abandoned by time, but the evidence we had found told a different story. Someone was here recently. Someone was using this place. Claire crouched near the muddy bank of the pond, her light fixed on the half-submerged shoe. She touched the drag marks that cut into the soil, trailing into the water like claw marks. "Someone didn't walk into the pond," she whispered. "They were pulled." I stood just behind her, scanning the tree line. "Or they wanted us to think that." She looked up at me sharply. "You think it's staged?" I nodded slowly. "Every step of this case feels like breadcrumbs. The pocket watch, the chain we heard, now this shoe. It's as if someone's been laying the trail just for us." Claire frowned, brushing damp hair from her face. "But why? If they want us here, what do they gain?" "That's what we need to find out," I said. "And we're running out of time." We moved further into the park, toward the old bandstand. The structure had collapsed years ago, its once proud roof sagging against the iron beams, the wood warped and blackened from rain. Beneath the debris, I noticed something metallic glinting faintly. I lifted a piece of broken wood and revealed a small tin box, wedged between the beams. Claire's breath caught. Another one. It was nearly identical to the box we'd found earlier, dented, rusted, heavy. I pried it open with my knife. Inside, folded neatly, were pages from an old ledger. Numbers, names, dates. Transactions written in precise handwriting. Some of the names I recognized, local business owners, city council members, even a retired police chief. The sums of money next to their names were staggering. Claire scanned the list, her brow furrowed. Bribes. Payoffs. But for what? Meetings, I muttered, piecing it together. This park. These people used to gather here, away from prying eyes. They kept records, hid them in boxes. And someone's been digging them up. I flipped through the pages. A date caught my eye, the very week the old gas station shut down 15 years ago. I remembered the case file, the sudden disappearance of its owner. His name was here too. Paid a sum so large it nearly filled the page. "Claire," I said quietly, "we've stumbled into something much bigger than a ghost story." Before she could respond, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. From the path behind us. We turned our lights together, beams cutting through the fog. A figure stood at the edge of the path, tall, broad-shouldered, the brim of a hat shadowing his face. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching. My hand drifted to the revolver under my coat. Claire whispered, "It's him." The man shifted slightly, and I caught the faintest glint of metal, a chain hanging from his pocket. A pocket watch chain. The very same kind we'd found earlier. He took a step forward. The boards of the old bandstand creaked beneath my boots as I stood taller. "Who are you?" I called out. The man tilted his head, as though considering whether to answer. Then, in a low voice that carried eerily well through the mist, he said, "You shouldn't have come here." "Too late for that," I replied. "What's your game? Why leave us the trail?" He chuckled softly, the sound dry as paper. "The trail isn't for you, detective. It's for them. The ones on that list. And you've just proven I was right, you're the only one who would follow it." Claire's hand gripped my sleeve. "Harry, he's playing us." I kept my eyes on him. Maybe. Or maybe he's trying to finish something he started a long time ago. The man took another step forward, then stopped at the base of the path. His face was still hidden, but his posture radiated calm confidence. "The truth is buried here, detective. But digging it up will cost you more than you realize." With that, he turned and melted back into the fog, footsteps fading into the distance. I moved as if to follow, but Claire grabbed my arm. "No, Harry. That's what he wants. We need to think." I stopped, breathing hard, then looked down at the ledger pages in my hand. Names, money, secrets that could destroy reputations. He was right about one thing, the truth was buried here. But it wasn't supernatural. It was corruption. And someone wanted it to stay hidden. Claire's voice was steady now. "So what's our next move?" I slipped the papers back into the box and tucked it under my arm. "We follow the money. We connect these names. And we lay a trap for the man with the chain." Her eyes narrowed with determination. "Then we end this." The fog thickened again, curling around the trees like smoke. For the first time that night, I felt like we were close, dangerously close, to pulling the final thread. And once we did, the whole thing would unravel. The interrogation room was still, the hum of the fluorescent light above filling the silence like an uninvited guest. The walls seemed to lean in, heavy with secrets. Edward Crane, the caretaker of the park, sat rigid in the metal chair. His face was worn like old leather, the creases deep enough to hide truths he had carried for decades. His hands were clasped together on the table, knuckles white, nails bitten down. He wouldn't meet Harry's eyes. Detective Harry leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. His voice was steady, controlled. "Edward, you've been circling around the truth since the day we stepped into that park. You know what happened to those people, the ones who vanished without explanation. You were the constant presence, the man in the shadows. It always led back to you." Crane finally shifted his gaze, eyes dull but filled with something unspoken. He swallowed hard before answering. "It wasn't murder, not the way you think." Claire leaned closer, her notebook forgotten in front of her. "Then what was it?" she asked quietly. Crane exhaled, as though the weight of years pressed down on him. "Those people came to me," he said. His voice was raspy, each word scraped from his throat. "They didn't vanish because they were taken. They vanished because they wanted to. They were tired of their lives, debts they couldn't pay, families they couldn't fix, mistakes that wouldn't stop haunting them. They wanted a way out. And I gave it to them." Harry frowned. "You helped them disappear?" Crane nodded. "I staged it. Left their belongings in the park, watches, wallets, coats. Just enough to make it look like they'd wandered off or met some grim fate. People believed the park had claimed them, that something darker lived in the fog. But the truth was simpler. I drove them away. New towns. New names. New lives. They paid me what they could, sometimes everything they had left. And I made them ghosts. The room was silent again, the weight of his confession thick in the air. Claire was the first to speak. "And the boy? The one whose pocket watch we found? You didn't stage that." Crane's face twisted with pain, his composure faltering. He rubbed his palms together as if trying to erase the memory. "No," he whispered. "He wasn't supposed to die." Harry's voice hardened. "Tell us." Crane's eyes glassed over, the memory dragging him back. "He came to me, just like the others. He wanted to leave, said he couldn't stand his father, couldn't stand the life waiting for him. I agreed to help. But when the time came, he panicked. Said he wanted to go back, that he'd made a mistake. He tried to run. It was near the old quarry, he stumbled, slipped. He fell." Crane's lips trembled. "I didn't push him. But I didn't help him either. I just let it happen." The confession settled over them like cold rain. Harry sat back in his chair, jaw clenched. "You built an empire of shadows, Edward. Maybe you thought you were helping. But the boy's death, that's not something you can just fold into excuses." Crane lowered his head. "I know." His voice was broken now, a whisper of a man who had carried too much for too long. Hours later, Harry and Claire walked back through the park, the fog still draped like a shroud over the trees. But the place felt different now, not haunted, not cursed. Just human. The silence of the paths told a story of desperation and choices, of people who had wanted to be forgotten. They stopped near the lamppost where it had all begun, where the pocket watch had glinted faintly under Harry's flashlight. The watch was now locked away as evidence, but Harry could almost hear its faint ticking in his memory, as if time itself had been a witness to the tragedy. Claire broke the silence. "Do you think anyone will believe him? That it wasn't murder?" Harry's gaze stayed fixed on the fog. "Belief doesn't matter. The truth does." He confessed. "And the truth is ugly, but it's what we came here to find." She nodded slowly, pulling her coat tighter around her. "So all those years of stories about the park, the whispers, the missing people, it was just him." "Not just him," Harry said softly. "It was the people, too. Their choices. Their pain. He was only the ferryman." They began walking again, their steps crunching softly on the damp ground. The mist seemed to thin as the first light of dawn pushed against it, washing the park in pale gold. For the first time, the shadows no longer seemed menacing. They were just shadows. As they reached the park's exit, Claire glanced back. "Strange, isn't it? How fear builds itself out of lies. For years, this place was a monster in people's minds. And in the end, it was just a man." Harry allowed himself a faint smile. "That's how monsters are born, Claire. Not in the dark. In us." They walked into the daylight, leaving the park behind. The case was closed. No more whispers. No more ghosts. Just the memory of a boy who had slipped too soon, and a caretaker who carried the weight of every choice he had made. And for Harry, another story carved into the lines of his face, one he would carry, but never tell.